In this video, we'll check some of the most important composition techniques you should know. Try to use these techniques as much as you can and practice till you start to use them without thinking about them. The first one is rule of thirds. Imagine your photo divided into 9 equal parts using 2 vertical and 2 horizontal lines, and place your primary subject on the intersection or along these lines. This is mostly the first rule to start with, but is a very powerful tool to create engaging photos. By placing your subject a little away from the center, you are making the composition more interesting and leaving the entire canvas to be filled with subjects to highlight your primary subject. Let's look at a few examples. In this first photo, the photographer has placed the kid directly looking into the camera along the lines. This photo is very pleasing to the eyes and is telling a story of how the life is these kids is in the slums. The next example of a coffee mug as primary subject is also placed on the grid lines. But there are other things that are helping the primary subject, like the beans in the table, the sugar, and the stirrer. Next example is set at a beautiful beach. The flip-flops are placed along the grid lines to create an engaging photo. The next photo was composed with the primary subject's flower and the bee on the intersection of lines to put more focus on them. The next composition technique is centered composition. For this, place your primary subject at the center of the frame and make sure that the foreground and background are not cluttered. This is a little opposite of the rule of thirds, but also very important in various situations. This is very helpful when you're using a very wide-angle lens to capture portraits. Placing them in the center creates an effect of the portrait standing out of the image. For example, this photo used a 50mm lens fish-eye lens. See how the lines on the table rounding of around the subject and how the subject is popping out of the screen. The next example would only have been a center composition because of the reflections on all sides due to its position and the angle of the photo. Next one is showing a bell in a temple. The curvature of the bell along the sides and the actual bell in the center makes the photo symmetric and pleasing look. In this last example, we composed it in a way to capture the rocks in the back and the bird in the center. If the bird was not in the center, the photo might have looked a bit different. Also, from this angle, the color in the background gave a good contrast. Third composition technique is leading lines. Leading lines is a very important tool as it helps the viewer to find out the primary subject in the image, or it helps take the viewer look deep inside the image. It essentially is like pointing in a direction to show something in real life. To understand this, we have to learn to find lines in our scenes. Lines do not have to be straight, they can be curves as well. But the idea is that these lines start from edge of the frame and lead us to the part of the image we are trying to capture. There are 4 types of leading lines: diagonals, curved, horizontal, and vertical. We recommend using diagonal and curved line more than the vertical and horizontal lines because vertical line generally divide the plane in half, and the viewer are only able to concentrate on one side of frame, and horizontal lines make the image flat and less dramatic. In this first example, the sides of the log are taking us to the center of the image. This is an example of diagonal lines. To get this photo, we had to bend down and use the log to fill the bottom of the frame so that the lines converge at the center. In this next example, the road is leading our eyes to the storm at the center of the image. This is an example of a curved line that is going diagonally. Roads and train tracks are very good sources of leading lines. In this photo, the train tracks and the boundaries show us a good example of this diagonal leading lines. This photo of London Eye has a lot of leading lines with some line meeting at the center of the image and spoke lines leading to the wheel. The next technique is to fill the frame. This is an amazingly simple and the most important rule of composition. According to us, this might be the only rule you should not break. You need to fill your frame with only the primary subject or subjects and get rid of everything else from the frame. If there are things in your frame which are not helping your composition, they will distract your viewer and make your photos less engaging. Let's look at a few examples. In this first photo, we capture this beautiful portrait of a young kid. The focus is on her eyes and missing tooth. If there was something else in the background, the impact of this portrait would have been reduced. The next example is a beautiful picture of small toy fans of various colors, which are captured with the background absolutely blurred out, putting all focus on our subject. This photo again is showcasing a man with face painted as a tiger. Again, we can see that filling the frame is helping us put more focus on the subject. Last example is a bit different. This is a view from top of the Empire State Building in New York. Idea was to capture capture this view and showcase how densely these structures are positioned. If there was something else at the end of the frame, like a river or something else, the perspective would have been lost, along with the impact of the photo. The next tool is reflections. Reflections are everywhere. Using this technique, you can use any lens and create interesting compositions in your own perspective. In this first photo, you see the beautiful golden temple of Amritsar and its reflection in the surrounding pond. Due to the gold color of the structure, reflection is looking beautifully distinct. Similarly, in this example, reflections on the water from various light sources like the bridges, the buildings, and the boat are creating a beautiful effect. Water actually diffuses the reflected light and merges different sources of light together. In this example, we can see that water is not still yet the reflection is really good. Water is reflecting the exact green color, which looks like continuation of the actual trees and logs. In this last example, we see a parking lot with no cars and symmetric road lights. Reflection of the lamps and the dark spots between them is what makes this composition really interesting. At the same time, the lake is reflecting lights from the other side all the way to the end of the photo. The next technique is negative space. This is a very interesting composition technique. Many other rules, like the rule of thirds, leading lines, and more, can be used along with this one to create interesting photos. Negative space means all the space around the subject. The subject itself is called in positive space. This technique is used to remove clutter from a scene so that the viewers are not distracted from the main subject. When you are composing a photo, try to balance the negative and positive space and make sure that the negative space is not overpowering the photo. Let's look at few examples. In this first example, the big cactus is click in front of a blue sky and white clouds. Notice that the cactus itself is very prominent and standing out in the photo. The viewer is directed towards the cactus. This is because of the negative space created by the sky and the clouds, which is putting more focus on the cactus. In this example, we converted the photo to black and white, and similar to the previous photo, the sky and the clouds are helping the cross to be more prominent in this image. This image is also following the rule of thirds, which was discussed before in this video. In this photo, all the sky is completely black. This creates an uncluttered background, especially for subjects with interesting lights, as in this photo. One thing to notice is that in such situation, you need to adjust white balance properly to capture the black in the background. Similarly, in this example, the small scooter replica is at the edge of the scene, and the wall behind it is creating a smooth and even negative space, pulling viewers' attention on the primary subject. The next example is not a traditional negative space, but the long exposure have made the water a smooth surface and even background for the boat to shine and be more in focus. Also, as the contrasting colors sometimes create better backgrounds or provide better distinction between negative and positive space. In this video, we talked about a few composition techniques. This was part 1 of this video. We'll see you in the next part soon.